right, everyone, get ready for another deep dive. Today we're focusing on something we can't live without: the atmosphere and air quality.
Literally can't live without it.
Exactly. Specifically, we'll be looking closely at chapters 10.1, 10.2, and 10.3 from this State of Our World report.
A pretty fascinating read, by the way.
Oh, yeah. It uses data from the past 5 years, so it's super up to date. And I think some of the insights might surprise you.
Definitely some eye-openers in there.
So consider this deep dive our journey to understand just what's going on out there in our atmosphere, the challenges we face with air pollution and human health, and just some of the amazing and kind of unsettling things that are happening in the air around us.
Sounds like a plan. Where do we want to start?
Well, chapter 10.1 kicks off by talking about the composition of the atmosphere, and, well, things are changing.
Definitely changing, and not always for the better.
Yeah, the report really highlights those greenhouse gas levels, which are on the rise.
Oh yeah, it's pretty alarming when you see the numbers.
Like, how much are we talking here?
Well, get this. CO2 levels have jumped from about 280 parts per million back before the Industrial Revolution to over 420 ppm just last year.
420, wow, that's a big jump.
And to put that in perspective, that's the fastest increase in 800,000 years.
800,000 years. That's practically forever. I mean, CO2 is the main thing that's warming up the planet, right?
Yeah, it's responsible for about 60% of the warming effect we're seeing.
Wow, 60%. I guess that's why everyone's making such a big deal about it.
It's a big deal, and it's not just CO2 either. Other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide are also increasing.
Oh, right, those two.
Yeah, methane's actually more than doubled since the Industrial Revolution, and nitrous oxide is up by about 20%.
Okay, so we're pumping the atmosphere full of these heat-trapping gases,
Yeah.
and that's causing global warming.
Exactly. It's like we're wrapping the Earth in a giant invisible blanket that traps heat from the sun.
And that's what's driving those increasingly wild weather patterns we're seeing, right?
Exactly. Hotter summers, colder winters, stronger storms, droughts. It's all connected.
It's kind of scary to think about,
Yeah.
But I guess there's nothing we can do about it now, right?
Actually, that's where you're wrong. There's a lot we can do, both individually and collectively, to slow down climate change.
That's good to hear, because honestly, it's easy to feel helpless when you're talking about something as big as the atmosphere.
Right. But there are success stories, and the report actually highlights one: the ozone layer.
Oh, yeah, the ozone layer. I remember learning about that giant hole in the ozone layer back in school. Whatever happened to that?
Well, thanks to some pretty amazing international cooperation, the ozone layer is actually recovering.
Really? That's fantastic.
It is. Back in the 80s, scientists discovered that certain chemicals we were using were damaging the ozone layer, which protects us from harmful UV radiation from the sun.
Right, it's like a global wake-up call.
Yeah, it was. And the world actually came together and agreed to phase out those ozone-depleting substances.
And that agreement was called the Montreal Protocol, right?
You got it. And it's actually considered one of the most successful environmental treaties ever.
So does that mean the ozone layer is totally healed?
It's getting there. Full recovery is still a few decades away, probably around the middle of the century.
Okay, so it's healing, but it's not completely fixed.
Right. And there are still some challenges.
Like what?
Well, for one, there's still some illegal production of those banned ozone-depleting substances.
Seriously, people are still making that stuff.
It's like trying to patch a hole in a boat while someone keeps poking new ones,
That's a good analogy.
And of course, climate change is also messing things up a bit.
Figures. Everything seems connected to climate change these days.
You're telling me it's a complex web of interconnected systems, that's for sure.
So what's the connection between climate change and the ozone layer?
Well, climate change can affect atmospheric circulation patterns, which can influence how those ozone-depleting substances are distributed in the atmosphere.
So like a domino effect.
Exactly. One thing affects another, and it all comes back to that delicate balance in the atmosphere.
Okay, so we've talked about greenhouse gases and the ozone layer. What else is going on up there?
Well, let's talk about particulate matter and aerosols.
Oh, yeah, those are the tiny particles that float around in the air, right?
Yeah.
Like dust, smoke, all that fun stuff.
Exactly.
I just assumed that was smog.
Smog is definitely a part of it. It's basically a mixture of different pollutants, including particulate matter.
And those particles can be pretty bad for our health, right?
They can, especially those really fine particles called PM2.5.
Why are those so bad?
Well, they're so tiny that they can actually penetrate deep into your lungs and even your bloodstream.
Oh, no.
And once they're in your bloodstream, they can trigger all sorts of health problems.
Like what?
Well, they can cause respiratory problems like asthma and bronchitis. And there's even growing evidence linking them to heart disease and cancer.
Wow, that's pretty serious stuff.
It is, and it's a major health concern, especially in cities where there is a lot of traffic and industrial activity.
So breathing in city air is basically like smoking then.
Well, not quite that bad, but you get the idea.
Okay, so we need to watch out for those tiny PM2.5 particles. But wait, didn't you say earlier that some aerosols can actually have a cooling effect?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, right? Some aerosols, like those from volcanic eruptions, can actually reflect sunlight back into space, which has a cooling effect.
Or pollution is actually helping us fight climate change. That doesn't sound right.
It's not that simple. This cooling effect is temporary, and it doesn't outweigh the long-term warming caused by greenhouse gases.
So it's like a temporary Band-Aid on a much bigger problem.
Exactly. And in fact, it might even be masking the true extent of the warming we're experiencing.
Okay, so it's not a solution, but it's interesting to know that there are these complex interactions happening in the atmosphere.
Definitely. The atmosphere is a constantly changing and evolving system, and there's still a lot we don't know about it.
So we've covered the basics of atmospheric composition and how it's changing, but how does all of this actually impact our health on a day-to-day basis?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll be getting into in the next chapter.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
We'll be diving into the nitty-gritty of air pollution and its impact on human health.
Don't miss it. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle Chapter 10.2, Air Pollution and Human Health.
You know, after that last chapter, it kind of makes you think twice about taking a deep breath.
I know, right? All those pollutants floating around out there. It's a little unnerving.
It is, and the report really drives home the point that air pollution is a serious global health issue.
Yeah, we talked about those 7 million deaths globally each year.
And it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And it's not just those immediate respiratory problems we think of.
Right, like asthma.
Exactly. There's a whole cascade of health impacts that air pollution can trigger.
So, what else are we talking about here?
Well, remember those tiny PM2.5 particles?
Yeah, the ones that can get into your lungs and bloodstream.
Those tiny particles can actually damage your cardiovascular system.
Oh, no, seriously?
Yeah. The report links long-term exposure to air pollution with an increased risk of heart attacks, strokes, even heart failure.
Wow, I had no idea it was that serious. It's like we think about air pollution and we think about our lungs, but it's really affecting our entire body.
It is, and there's even emerging research that suggests a connection between air pollution and cognitive decline.
Wait, are you telling me that breathing polluted air can affect our brains?
That's what some studies are suggesting, and it's definitely an area that needs more research.
Wow, that's pretty scary stuff.
It is, and it just goes to show how pervasive the impacts of air pollution can be.
Okay, so air pollution is bad for our lungs, our hearts, and maybe even our brains.
It paints a pretty grim picture, unfortunately.
So are some people more vulnerable to these effects than others?
Absolutely. Children, the elderly, and people with pre-existing health conditions, they're particularly susceptible to those harmful effects.
That makes sense. Their systems are either still developing or they're already weakened.
Exactly. And sadly, people living in poverty often bear a disproportionate burden of air pollution.
Why is that?
Well, low-income communities are often located closer to sources of pollution, like factories and busy highways.
Right, and they may not have the same access to healthcare or resources to help mitigate those impacts.
It creates this vicious cycle, you know? Poverty makes you more vulnerable to pollution, and then pollution can worsen health problems, making it even harder to escape poverty.
It's a really complex issue with a lot of layers.
It is, but the report also offers some hope, highlighting steps we can take to address this global health crisis.
Okay, so what can we do? Besides wearing masks and buying air purifiers, what are some concrete actions we can take?
Well, reducing emissions is key, as we've talked about. That means transitioning to cleaner energy sources, improving fuel efficiency in vehicles, and really cracking down on industrial emissions.
Right, those big systemic changes.
Exactly. But individual actions matter too. Choosing to walk, bike, or take public transportation instead of driving alone.
All those little things add up, right?
They do, and if you're thinking about getting a new car, consider an electric or hybrid vehicle.
Yeah, those are becoming more and more popular.
They are, and they're getting more affordable too.
My dad's always on me about that.
He's right. Little things like using energy efficient appliances, switching to LED light bulbs, and just being mindful of your thermostat can make a real difference.
So it's about being more conscious of our energy use in all aspects of our lives.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about the Montreal Protocol and the global cooperation that led to the recovery of the ozone layer?
Yeah, that was a pretty amazing success story.
Well, we need that same kind of international collaboration to tackle air pollution.
So it's not just about individual actions, but also about holding our leaders accountable and demanding action on a larger scale.
Absolutely. We need to push for policies that promote clean energy, sustainable transportation, and environmental justice.
We need to make our voices heard and demand a cleaner, healthier future for everyone.
Well said. So it's not about feeling helpless. It's about channeling that concern into action, both in our personal lives and by advocating for change at a larger level.
Okay, I'm feeling a little more empowered now. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the doom and gloom, but it's important to remember that we can make a difference.
Exactly. We have the power to create a healthier future for ourselves and for generations to come.
All right, feeling inspired and ready to tackle the final chapter in our atmospheric adventure. What's next?
Chapter 10.3 dives into the world of weather patterns and how they're changing.
Oh, this is where things get really interesting. Let's do it. Okay, so we've talked about what the atmosphere is made of and how air pollution affects us. Now, what's chapter 10.3 all about?
Well, this chapter really dives into those fascinating and sometimes kind of scary weather patterns and how they're changing, like we touched on with El Nino and the monsoons.
Right, those global weather patterns. I've always been kind of fascinated by weather, like how it can change so quickly and have such a big impact on our lives.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And with climate change kind of messing things up, it seems like the weather is getting even more unpredictable and extreme.
Oh, absolutely. Like it seems like every year we're breaking records for heat waves, droughts, floods, huge storms, you name it.
You're exactly right. And the report actually highlights that increase in extreme weather events as a major concern.
It's not just something happening far away either, right? We're seeing those impacts right here in our own communities.
Exactly. Climate change is happening now, and it's affecting everyone, everywhere.
So what's causing these more extreme weather events? Is it all tied to climate change?
Well, climate change is definitely the main driver. As the planet warms, the atmosphere holds more moisture, leading to more intense rainfall and flooding. And warmer temperatures also increase evaporation, which can make droughts worse. And then there's the warmer ocean waters, fueling those powerful storms.
It's like climate change is putting all those natural weather patterns on steroids, making them more powerful and unpredictable.
That's a great way to put it. And the report gives some specific examples of how this is playing out around the world. Like in some regions, the rainy seasons are becoming shorter, but way more intense, which can really disrupt agriculture and water resources.
Yeah, we were just talking about that with the monsoons and how those shorter, more intense rainy seasons can lead to floods and damaged crops.
Exactly. And in other places, droughts are becoming more frequent and lasting longer, leading to water shortages, wildfires, and even people having to leave their homes.
It's just heartbreaking to think about the impact these climate-driven weather events are having on people's lives, losing homes, livelihoods, even their lives, because of a changing climate.
It's a stark reminder that climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's a human issue, a social justice issue. Those who have contributed the least to the problem are often the ones suffering the most from its consequences.
It's definitely a lot to process. But is there any hope? Are we just doomed to a future of endless weather disasters?
No, not at all. While the report paints a sobering picture of the challenges we face, it also highlights our incredible capacity for resilience, innovation, and adaptation.
So there's still a chance to turn things around.
Absolutely. We have the knowledge, the tools, and the collective power to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change and create a more sustainable future.
Okay, that's a little reassuring. What needs to happen to make that happen?
Well, it's going to require a global effort, Governments, businesses, communities, individuals, we all need to step up and do our part.
So it's not just about what we do individually, but also about demanding action from those in power.
Exactly. Remember those individual actions we talked about earlier, reducing our energy consumption, choosing sustainable transportation, making conscious choices about what we buy. Those all make a difference. And we can also vote for leaders who prioritize climate action, support businesses committed to sustainability, and advocate for policies that protect our planet. It sounds like there's a lot we can do, both big and small.
There is. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to the collective effort. It's about shifting our mindset from what can I do to what can we do together.
Well, that's a pretty inspiring message to wrap up this deep dive. It's been a whirlwind of information, learning about the atmosphere, the interconnectedness of all these natural systems, and the urgent need for action to address climate change and air pollution.
It really has. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope our listeners feel more informed and empowered to make a difference.
Me too. Knowledge is power, and understanding these complex issues is the first step towards creating a better future.
Couldn't agree more. So to our listeners, we encourage you to stay curious, keep learning, and most importantly, take action. The future of our planet depends on it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.